Ginagai. I'd like to welcome to my country the Gumbaynggirr country. From the oceans to the mountains. This is all our country here. Welcome to this beautiful place. Look after it and it'll look after you. First of all, I'd like us to acknowledge we are on the lands of my people, the Gumbaynggirr people, and to acknowledge my ancestors who have walked this land for thousands of years. Imagine flying over our lands well before the early settlers arrived in this country, to see the huge trees, the clear waterways, the abundance of the animals, and the land and the water, the sky being full of birds, the animals everywhere. The Gumbaynggirr people were living in paradise, such a rich lifestyle.
Julu meral gundi meral julu ngimpan meral gundi julu gerai yarang jaki
ya gapagu julum gu bangu urunda ya
The spirit of those old people is still with us, still guiding us as we travel around Australia. No matter where you go in Australia, you will always be walking on Aboriginal lands.
The view from the range was magnificent. At our feet was the narrow glen of the Bellingen, choked up with dark green impervious brush. We at length arrived at the fresh running stream, which was flowing as clear as crystal in a narrow bed of large shingles. As it had been excessively sultry, it was quite delightful to drink of the pure waters of the river. The brush contained the finest cedar and rosewood I had ever seen. The trunks of these trees were often 6 feet in diameter and 90 feet high before they threw out a single branch. These men are generally convicts who have become free by servitude. They live in pairs in the dense dark brushes, as they are continually moving in search of fresh cedar.
They called the Aboriginal people in Bellingen the Bellingen Blacks, because they put up a huge resistance to the influx of early white settlers in the area. On the escarpment, when the colonial surveyor come through Dangar, they drove all the Aboriginal people off that escarpment. And he committed massacres as he come through also to drive the Aboriginal people out of the lands, because they were seen as a hindrance to the development of the early white colonial settlements.
I mean, in Bellingen, you could get everything that you needed in Bellingen. Now, I mean, in those days, Coffs Harbour was 1,000 miles away. I mean, you never even thought of Coffs Harbour.
The two main industries in the valley were logging and farming. So you had to fall down through timber, hit another tree. But that there, when we did that, we'd wipe the whole valley out, the whole gully out. Today we'd be jailed. Beautiful water, you know, when we first went there, it was black by the time we finished. Today we'd be jailed. But those times. I didn't know much more then.
Right.
That was my job. That was where I was getting my income from.
Bellingen in those days, I mean, it was a little agricultural town.
This is the untold story of how a small group of alternative lifestylers and hippies came to a small, dying dairy town halfway between Sydney and Brisbane. That town was Bellingen, on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. In the 1970s and 80s, Peter Geddes, a journalist, used his 8mm camera to record what happened in and around Bellingen during that time.
We bought an old station wagon and a trailer, and we drove all around the east coast of Australia looking for a nice place to live. And what you're about to see now is the story I found when I came to Bellingen. Turned off at Raleigh, 7 miles to Bellingen, and drove up this absolutely wonderful valley, and we were just absolutely gobsmacked at just how beautiful it was, but how deteriorated it was, just how run down and sad it looked. All the buildings were dilapidated. I'd never seen so many rusty roofs. Everything was just rusted out. No one had painted anything in the previous 30 or 40 years. If it wasn't a Friday, it was deserted. There was just nobody in Bellingen, no cars even. You know, it's not nobody. I mean, I just laugh when I go there now and I can't find a parking space. You could have parked anywhere in those days.
It was dying in the late 60s. People were deserting the place like rats leaving a sinking ship.
There was a guy called Bill Chapman who was a real estate agent, among other things. We got him to show us around. We told him we were looking for a small acreage and we wanted to be what we would now call earth gardeners or something, but in those days we didn't have a name for it. We were just some refos, some boat people, if you like, from Canada, and he'd been showing us around for weeks and we weren't getting anywhere much, and he said, "Have you ever thought of owning a shop?" I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, there's these people, they've got a shop opposite the hotel and they want to sell it really bad." And we said, "Oh, we'll have a look at it." We had to go back into town anyhow. It was just up the street from his shop. And we went in and we looked at it. It wasn't a very impressive place. It was pretty awful. It had a condemned sign on the front door, which didn't really put the price up too much. We went upstairs and had a look at it, and it had a veranda on it, and it was closed in with fibro and some louvers, and I liked the idea of that having a residence and the potential to maybe make some money at the same time. We moved into it about a month later. We realised very quickly, that the shop was just such a dump and there was nothing in there. There was a bloody toilet down the back lane. We had to pull down the veranda. It was, it was a mess. There was just no one around. I guess that was the thing. She took $8 the first day. I think it was a week or so before she got to take $10 for a whole day's take. All of a sudden I was, got this rundown building, 5 kids in school. The shop was open from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. when we took it over, 7 days a week. And we had the kids and just, like I said, what have we done? My wife was a good cook. That was really a big help because we always had plenty of rotten bananas, and she used to make up banana cakes by the ton. She used to make great salads in the summer and great stews and casseroles and beans and stuff. And we got Vogel's bread. That was the first time anybody had ever seen proper bread in Bellingen. And we had yogurt. We put a dirty big sign up the front saying the good food shop. Our only customers were literally Bellingen people, and there just wasn't anybody else here. And there were so many people in Bellingen in those days who had never been out of Bellingen. To go to Coffs was a sort of a major trip for a lot of them.
The people that were brought up here and who didn't travel much south of Urunga.
We had people come in and say, "Oh yeah, I've been to Sydney. I was demobbed there after the war."
The entire economy was pretty well based on timber and dairy.
Well, man, run, boys, run, run.
It was also, remember, the time of the dairy quota.
To people who were just eking out a living on dairy farms, when the CDA, the Central Dairy Authority, decided that they had to go onto bulk milk, that they couldn't sell cream to Britain anymore. Britain had joined the Euro market, and so cream was no longer the go. They had to put in these bloody stainless steel vats, and they were huge, and they cost $3,000 each, and that doesn't sound much today, but that was a new Holden in those days.
There were only 15 farming families in Darkwood. They were the only people that lived there. That was it. No one else.
Did me dog come out, did he? Here! Come on, mate. Come on. When we moved in here a few years after, that was pretty much the beginning of the end of the dairying.
The farmers were so poor that they couldn't afford to go out. They couldn't afford to have people as guests for dinner or anything. They could not afford it. They were lucky to be able to keep their families fed.
They worked like slaves, morning and night, and got no more than the dole.
So farmers, they were basically going out the door backwards.
So they'd all packed up and left the valleys in droves, and now I couldn't believe why when I saw how beautiful they were, but I realise now why, because I didn't realise that.
So about all of a sudden there was dozens and dozens of empty farms.
Fundamentally it was because most of those people that were affected were in the rural areas, because they were on farms that weren't terribly successful, and these people came along and bought them, communed them and all that, and so there was a big they were the ones most affected. They probably didn't want to leave their farms, but they had to because of money.
They just weren't making a living, so the Australian paper mills came in and bought all the little poor farms and planted trees on them. And then the farmers went and got a job in Shire, the mill, in the bush or something like that, because they just couldn't make ends meet.
As the dairy farmers sort of went under and had to get out, that's when the new generation, if you want to refer to them as hippies, sort of started to move in the early 70s and right through to the 80s.
In May 1973, the citizens of Nimbin, only 3 hours north of Bellingen, found themselves in the centre of a social revolution. What started out as just the annual party for the Australian Union of Students became a cultural turning point.
It was that peak of excitement at the end of the anti-war, anti-conscription movement, when anything seemed possible. The Whitlam government had been elected, and we're out to change the world.
Oh, we have our ups and downs. Oh, people getting busted for growing dope in the hills, swimming naked in the creek.
We were young and optimistic. We dreamed big dreams.
I'm sure that a lot of people are going to go from here and carry on with this way of life, you know.
The Aquarius Festival came and went, and all these people who didn't decide to live in Nimbin, they went off on the road looking for somewhere like Nimbin, and many of them turned up in Bellingen, and our shop became like a magnet for them, because we did sell yogurt and we did sell smoothies and all that sort of hippie stuff. We didn't think of them as hippie stuff, we just thought that was proper food. That was why we called it the good food shop. You could get a really nice house with electricity and hot water and a kitchen that worked, you know, a tap inside and all that sort of thing. You could plug in a fridge, $5 a week.
They sold land to the people that couldn't afford it in Nimbin, and effectively those people reinvigorated the place. I mean,
and it wasn't sort of just, you know, like 300 hippies arrived in Bellingen. They sort of arrived, old Holden by old Falcon, single mums, young couples, runaways, Peter Horton.
And we were buying up all this amazing land in this beautiful valley.
And that's what happened. The hippies bought the land.
I had this idea that I wanted a block of ground with water, permanent water. That's what we're after. We found this little block off the coast back in the hinterland. And the first question I asked the salesperson was what the water was like. And he says, it's permanent water. I said, right, we'll get it, we'll buy it. Little did we know that it was fertile ground, which we were happy to have. Plenty of timber for building and plenty of water. What else do you need? Because we were the first ones to buy in the area, we were quickly followed by a lot of their friends.
I came here from Melbourne on a holiday because in Melbourne they had, the doctors had diagnosed and given me Valium, and I thought this is not the way I want to go. So I had a cousin here and I came up to see what people did who lived in the bush, being a city dweller. And when I got here it was a way of life that I could only dream about, and I thought, no, I want to be a part of this. And within the 2 weeks that I was here, I put a deposit on the property at Buckley-Bendini, and within a year I sold my business in Melbourne and I was here.
I was working in Sydney and I had a mate and he was telling me about these shares for sale in this block of land in this valley called Upper Darkwood, which was near Bellingen. I'd never been to Bellingen. I didn't know where Upper Darkwood was, but the shares were cheap, so I ended up buying a share. Bought it sight unseen and then promptly forgot about it until there was a part in my life where I was between jobs. My girlfriend had dumped me and I thought, oh, it might be a good time to go up and have a look at the block.
This place was so beautiful that I first visited it with Valdi, another woman and another child, the same age as Val. We came down from Murwillumbah and we came to see friends of ours that were living there. But in that time, Valdi and I just saw this beautiful, beautiful, mystical place that was just magic.
I walked up the river and I saw this lovely little clearing across the river. And went and sat over there and just thought, oh yeah, this is it. $4,000 for 112 acres.
We came on our way to go back to India and called in here to see Annette, and Annette took us up to Darkwood. It was just more and more beautiful everywhere we went, so we decided to spend our money that we were going to spend travelling here.
I think it was 1976. I know I was pretty disillusioned. I lost my job with the health department when the Whitlam government went out, and I remember thinking, oh dear, what do I do now? And I'd been looking around. The alternative lifestyle had appealed to me. I'd read about it. I'd been to meetings. And I looked everywhere, and then somebody said, I won't give you their names. Why don't you come with us to Bellingen? They had a stolen car, and they drove me to Bellingen. I didn't understand why we were going all the back roads. I was very naive in those days. Anyway, they took me to Kalang, where I went to stay with the Oakleys, who'd been here a year or so before me, and I was totally enamoured of the place. Fell in love, in fact.
I was 19, and when I got up here, I just fell in love with the place and decided to stay. So I completely dropped out of uni. My parents were horrified, of course.
Refuge from the city. We were living in Sydney at that time, and we had a small child, an infant, and so we were looking to leave the city, find somewhere that was livable and beautiful, and we found it here.
Anyway, I was allowed to go and look in Thora and Darkwood, which is a pretty magic place, and I found it straight away. I bought it and moved up with my children. No, I didn't move up with my children, but they came anyway. Moved up with a whole crowd of people, and we all slept in the pigsty. We made a huge big bed and a big open fire and cobbled the floor, and I camped in the pigsty and had a wonderful time. And I kept meeting people. They kept, what's this older woman doing up in the valley? Who is she? They came to visit, bringing me various gifts. We had a wonderful time. It was magic.
The whole idea, if you wanted to get onto some land, was to buy some shares of other people. You split it, 3, 4, 5 ways, and because the land was pretty cheap at that time, you could get onto sizable acreage for not very much money. And that was really a way that the hippies actually were able to buy the properties in those valleys.
We found a lot of like-minded people who were looking for the same sort of things, but it was the beginning of a community. That's what grew from here.
I love the fact that you could actually buy a bit of land and chop a tree down and dig a hole and put it in the ground and build yourself a house. And there were no rules and regulations and applications and fees to pay. We were just doing it regardless for what the consequences were going to be. And the social interaction was very comfortable and very free. And it was like being a part of an experiment, getting in at the early stages.
Well, people basically moved up there and started camping on their land or their mate's land or pretty well anyone's land. And then, I guess because it rained a lot, they liked the idea of having a roof, so they started building shacks. And they were shacks, like some of them were, and people were moved into cow bales and all sorts of old buildings that were around. And some of the shacks eventually turned into houses, but nobody got permission because they were nothing more than poles they'd cut from the bush and some old tin that they'd managed to find to put on the roof.
But of course, nobody had a clue about building houses. I've been in private school, they don't teach you how to build it. They didn't have a clue. So wigwams are pretty popular. Then there were these sort of brush cubbies that were supposed to be huts, but they weren't, of course.
And they'd have an earth floor and they'd have a little fireplace in the corner. They lived very happily, visiting each other, playing music, sharing meals.
Eventually, because nobody did have permission, there were so many that the councils on the north coast had to either come and demolish them all, which would have meant that they'd get a lot of bad publicity with, crying children and toys crushed under bulldozers and wailing and screaming. So they decided to try and bring in multiple occupancy and legalise the whole thing and get everything up to scratch, with a few kind of sacrificial lambs in the process.
And then one day old French Henry trotted up there and he said, "You cannot stay in the pigsty. The winter is coming. You will be cold." The idea was to get into your sleeping bag at 6 o'clock so they didn't lose any heat. And you walked around in your sleeping bag. Anyway, Henry built me a nice house.
There were lots of communities and people who had travelled from backpacking around Asia, and for people from all over the world, just living in humpies which they'd built out of sheets of iron and old windows and bits of timber they'd found at the local rubbish tip.
Dropouts, society's dropouts, living in caravans up to the bush and all sort of stuff. And that's the only thing that when I was on council that we insisted on doing. People were getting knocked back for building and so forth, good people. When next door over the fence there was lots of dwellings going up that there was no approval for, right? And they didn't use their brains, the alternates. It's a pity because it might have been a much nicer area if they had.
I think of going to the Bellingen council chambers when Ray Cork was the Shire president. Ray Cork was a real beaut old bloke. He was Cork's Motors up in Dorrigo. And Ray said, "I don't know what all the fuss is about these little houses." He said, "When we were pioneering this valley, we all lived in shacks. We all just had little houses." He said, "The house I grew up in is probably just about the size of the table here in this council chamber." He said, "The hippies are okay, that's what we were like. That's just what we were doing." And he said, "Now that we're old and tired and respectable and we've built our proper houses, we're down on them. They're all right."
I remember one day I was sitting in the chook house, and over the hill came this girl, this gorgeous blonde girl on a horse. And she came up and we had a chat, and by the end of it she put me on the back of the horse, little Joe, and we went galloping back down to the valley, and she took me down to Easy Street. And that's when I got to meet the other people who lived in the valley, and that's when the real fun began. it was like I'd found myself in heaven. I found this family. I found this family who I really loved and got on with, and we had a riot of a time. We laughed and we played and we made love and we'd got stoned and had food and just celebrated that lovely lifestyle that we were really busy inventing.
I loved it. I've been a fairly, not a regular visitor, but I've visited a few times to Mullumbimby, and the idea that this was here hadn't occurred to me.
The freedom of the way of life, all day to do as you pleased, and the way people interacted, they weren't judgmental, everybody was accepting of one another, no matter who you were and where you came from. And everybody was interesting, and that there was such a variety of people from different walks of life. You really felt like you were part of making something special.
Jumping off the deep end, give up your job, your career.
It was like an experimental lifestyle, the sharing, which only a few years before, when I'd heard about Nimbin, I'd poo-pooed the idea of that sort of sharing. But once I got here and saw to what degree it was working and what it was creating, it was giving you free range to develop ideas and things that I'd never gone into my head before. And I love that.
We used to sit round, dens of squalor drinking 60-cent flagons of wine, I didn't smoke dope then, but some of the others did. And discussing just what's going on now. Right. Been sitting around for 46 years waiting for the fucking the world to fucking implode, and it still hasn't happened.
I went into the Bellingen Hotel, that was where I used to take my limps, and was having a beer, and I ran into Pamela Goodwin, and she took one look at me and said, "Gee, you look like you need some help," and I said, I don't know what I need, I think I'll have a beer, that'll start me. And anyhow, she invited me to come out to Dreamtime. She said, "We've got a lot of people out here who are really good healers, and they know, they might be able to help you, we might be able to help you." And so I don't know whether she really was that surprised. So a couple of days later I turned up, and I had a little two-man tent and a sore back. And as I say, there was only 7 dreamers there, and they had a chip heater, and I was good at doing chip heaters. I'd learnt that along the way, and I used to be in charge of making the bath every night, mainly because I wanted to get in it. That was I just loved the idea of being in the bath, and various dreamers would come along and share it, and some would bring gifts and smokes and drinks, and it was a revelation to me, the whole place. And we'd cook up this great big meal after we'd washed up, it seemed like 3 ton of dishes. We used to wash all the dishes in the washing troughs. And we'd be sitting around the fire having our dinner, and Paul Cullinan there was a wonderful astrologer. He did my chart, and I had healing from Kamala and Pamela and Joa, and Ken Yeomans was there then with Pamela. It was a great time.
A lot of the hippies were from wealthy middle-class families. A lot of them were well educated, and this had intimidated the locals at the beginning. They felt very uncomfortable because they knew these people were trained in ecology. They knew what they were talking about when they were saying protect the rainforest. They knew what they were talking about when they got into the organic gardening and started the organic movement.
Somebody had to sort of come in and sort of replace the farmers that were sort of having to move off. And I think a lot of the young people that came in here, they probably had the backing of their families to a large extent. I mean, they probably come from quite well-to-do families. And, you could bloody buy a farm for $10,000, you know what I mean?
Every day was mad. Every day there was something going on. There was the day that Madame Lash came in, and I'm not sure what she was doing, but there was a whole crowd of people, and we were moving something. There was something being moved across the bridges. Yeah, it was just crazy. Crazy fun.
It was a bit of a struggle. We were fortunate. We just happened to come into a couple of good seasons. But both Pauline did as much on the farm as what I did, and she had to rear through the kids as well on top of that. And probably conservatively, we each worked 80 hours each a week, 365 days of the year.
We're very fortunate because we're a block here, unlike Thora, where you had two rednecks and a hippie, more rednecks, hippie, but we had 10 kilometres of road, but the only hippies lived there.
Probably not quite a redneck, but I could have been looked upon as a redneck, you know, somebody that, you know, if it grew, you cut it down, if it bloody moved, you shot the bloody thing, you know. And, but following, after a few years and having the alternates around, or hippies if you want to keep on referring to them as hippies, I sort of moved pretty much to the middle ground. And today I sort of see myself as just as green as I am red, you know.
Homebrew. Yeah. Smoked a bit of dope. Parties were in the every Saturday and Sunday down the Strongholm swimming hole. Nobody ate meat, did they, Peter? Well, not many.
No, the hall was a big thing too, I think. You know, like having the hall there, that seemed to be always a focal point. I don't know whether I just went there with the camera, but there's so much film that's people at the hall, you know, whether it's Tina playing table tennis with Ian Pollock or whether it's Bob Bryant.
There's always been foodies here though.
Yep, yeah, well that was a good thing.
You know, that was a big thing. We always, any time they had, what about those Christmas parties they'd have for the kids? And the food, it runs for miles, you know, everybody brought along a plate.
Well, Cook's Creek is a good name for food, isn't it?
Yeah.
And your mum and your wife and Joan and many other people were all such good cooks.
Everybody contributed.
The other thing, I'm not sure whether people moved to the north coast because the old dairy farm areas had magic mushrooms, and I think that might have been an important motivator for hippies, because this is before they grew dope or anything. You know, they just go up there and, you know, you really need a cow to some cow pats for it to grow in, and then it was like free trips.
Everybody was smoking dope.
We were stoned from the moment we got up to the moment we went to bed at night. And I did that for about 3 years, and I got a very good connection with nature. I felt deeply connected with things. I started to feel very creative. I let go of a lot of my academic training and my family structure.
They introduced the marijuana to this district. I mean, prior to that, I hadn't even heard the word.
I think there was resentment that somebody could come in and take up land and, from their eyes, do nothing but bludge on the dole before it became obvious that we were all supporting ourselves with a bit of marijuana growing as well. It took them quite a while to catch on to that, but certainly a few of the locals ended up being big marijuana growers after a while.
Well, you know, everybody was growing their own dope here. Everyone. We were in the Green Triangle.
One particular fellow, he was a pretty big dope grower, and he pulled me up one day and he said, "Darcy," he said, "when are you going to wake up to your bloody self and stop chasing those skinny cows around and get into something that's going to make some real money, you know?" Yeah.
And I seem to remember there were a few kind of cannabis cup type things up there. You know, harvest festivals where people would bring.
Oh yes, the biggest bard, their prime bard, and they got judged and stuff, and people walking in with this. And And I sort of liked it too because we were always outside the law, and so outside the law was actually where you lived. I mean, you didn't pay much attention to the law, like if you're a dope smoker.
It was illegal, so that was a very fringe part of fringe culture, so it had a lot of negative things that went with that.
And of course some of them were selling it to their mates in Sydney, making a few bob, but every penny of that money was spent in town because we were all building and trying to keep old cars on the road and things. So it kind of made the town boom.
Have the helicopters and the police raids and that sort of stuff. And I can remember down the road, so the police had a roadblock set up there and pulling everybody up. And 25 metres away in an old chook pen, there was a great big patch of marijuana. And they didn't even know it was there. Oh, gee.
One day I just decided I didn't want to do that anymore. I looked around and I saw the people around me were reacting when they ran out. They were getting very moody, they were very paranoid. I had a very closed circle of friends. They only related to people who smoked dope. Once I decided that I didn't want to do it anymore, my body just became allergic and I just couldn't stand being around it. The smell of it would make me feel sick. Right. So I had to leave.
One of the really important part of, I reckon, is the Wednesday night at the Federal Hotel.
The pub with Bobby Bright.
Bobby Bright and the Gallopers.
Yeah. That was like an institution, wasn't it, You go in there, you get a bath or a shower, drinking in the bath, 3 or 4 people in the bath together, smoking dope upstairs, go down and you get pissed at the band downstairs.
This cabin is made of earth and wood.
That band that Bob had, PC and Ray and the drummers would change, but
Graham Bennett was the drummer for a while,
and Big Bill.
Big Bill, yeah. It became so crowded, people were coming from everywhere.
You couldn't not dance to them.
No, you couldn't not dance to them. No.
I say go Johnny go, let it do.
I was in those days. I mean, for me, everybody had to work. I mean, that was the thing, work, and because that was when that period first started. It was a little bit of a culture shock for me, And
they weren't doing their 80 hours a week.
They weren't, mate. No, they weren't, and plenty of girls around the place, and people swimming without any clothes on, and all that sort of stuff.
Right. What did you think of that?
It didn't worry me, but it's not the sort of thing that I'd sort of grown up with.
The old farmers actually quite often liked the hippie women. They thought they were fantastic. Their long, beautiful hair and their see-through blouses, no bra, skirts down to the ground and beads, flowers in their hair. They were absolutely mesmerised. Right. But they hated the hippie men. They hated the long hair and the beards and the beads. They thought they were a bunch of poofters or something. Pansies. Couldn't stand them.
You go from up here, you go into Bellingen, and people used to say to me, Darcy, how do you live amongst those hippie scum up there, stealing all your stuff and all that sort of stuff, which was just absolutely, totally wrong. But of course that was just based on ignorance as well, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you remember what Darkwood Rules was? Susie Kersey invented it, and the idea was that you could be with anyone, you could go with anyone, but the only thing is you couldn't fall in love and you couldn't get jealous. And I used to love Johnny Rand because Johnny Rand always fall in love.
Yes.
And then got wounded. And he was the classic kind of anti-Darkwood rules, but everyone else kind of coped with it.
Yeah, right. That was like everyone had a fling with everyone, really, didn't they?
One of the reasons I liked Kalang, I went out to Darkwood and I checked it out, and it was a single scene, and Kalang was a family scene, and straight away I felt more comfortable in the family scene, and so I kind of came back to Kalang.
So what were you hoping for when you came to Bellingen? What brought you here?
Just the chance to maybe bring up my kids in a free, comfortable, healthy environment.
You're a mum, 5 children, and you made the decision to have them at home.
Yeah, so I became aware that it was possible, and I liked the idea, and so I started researching it, reading about books on Stephen Gaskin's meditation community in America and how they were doing home birthing over there.
So were there any other women having babies at home?
Yes, a lot of people did, and funnily enough, there weren't the problems in those days that sometimes people seem to have now.
You mean?
The births were normally just relatively easy and successful.
Yeah, people were home birthing. I did it. I had Ozzy at home on the veranda.
So I sort of decided to, get as healthy as I could, get a good support network. I contacted a midwife.
We had a midwife and someone, Sue Urbacher, with experience to come and help.
Chan just said, I think you're going to go into labour today. She said, I think I'll stay. And so she stayed and she helped with the delivery.
The baby wasn't coming. I got Phil Bingham, the osteopath, to come over, gave me a neck adjustment. Within half an hour, I was in labour. 2 hours later, Celeste was born.
The statistics show that actually it's a lower risk situation if you have covered all of those bases.
Right.
You're much less likely to have a long birth and complications.
And I think in the city I wouldn't have learnt a lot of the things I've learned. I probably would never have helped deliver other people's babies, and I possibly wouldn't have had a baby 2 of my babies at home in the city.
Taking responsibility for your body and your life, and that's really what home birthing is about.
It was wonderful, really wonderful, yeah.
But yeah, I was glad I did that.
We set up a little preschool, one of the parents did anyway, at their home, and then later on the parents all had a meeting and decided to build a school. And the school was amazing. The parents and the children built the school out of mud bricks on the site, and one of the parents had designed the building, and then the parents had working bees. One of the communities donated the land for the school, and a little school got started. And the school used to run with about 20 kids at the maximum at one stage. The teacher was working on the doll, and the parents would give him an extra $40 a week out of their doll check. And the teacher would work in the mornings, and the parents would do the afternoon shift.
Small education is really good for children.
And a lot of the values that were being taught by mainstream Australia were not our values.
The few kids that were going to school, and they had to go to Bellingen Primary, and they were really discriminated against.
See it in things like my 2 lovely little shiny golden-haired daughters being called dirty hippies on the bus by scabby-kneed, runny-nosed, snotty little greasy-haired boys, right?
This was on the way to the primary school?
This is on the way to school, and the guy driving the bus let it happen. He never stopped it. He thought it was fine, right?
I think I put a notice up for a shop and asked for any interested people in getting a school together, and there were 70 parents rocked up.
And then I sort of moved into home educating, because we felt that it was great to keep that connection with the children and not let them suddenly just get swamped by the peer group pressure
To be part of trying to change something, and I'm really happy that I changed. The kids didn't have to go all that way to town for school, and they were in a more nurturing environment to be educated.
Some of the dads might teach kids how to take a gearbox apart.
Right.
Or
Right.
someone else would show them how to make a cake, or, people would come up with all sorts of things, and it was great. And then I got involved with the Homeschooling Teenage Network.
The new settlers encouraged education, and their children have become scientists, airline pilots, filmmakers, theatre directors, events managers, Hollywood cameramen, political advisors, musicians, CEOs, entrepreneurs. There's even a High Court judge.
Giving the girls that freedom and independence, they all grew up to be very independent and self-sufficient.
All these years I loved living up the bush. I really loved living up the bush. It was very beautiful and it was really nice, and it was very nice to bring my children up to have that luxury of living in such a stunning place, and they be able to go and swim in the river and ride their bikes and not feel that something dreadful was going to happen to them. And if nothing else in my life, I feel really proud that I actually did that with Arama School.
You can count your pennies, count your roses, but you can't count much in the darkness, I suppose. Oh, so I lay down and I listen to the west wind blow. Oh, by now I didn't think I'd be on my own.
It was culture shock of the first order, although probably nowhere near the shock the Aborigines experienced at the arrival of the first settlers. Soon there was not an empty house to be found in the district, and property values started to climb. The good food shop became a focal point and was often buzzing while the rest of Bellingen dozed.
Ian and Martha thought the good food shop was great, but they said Bellingen needs to expand, like Nimbin did. All these empty shops here, there's nothing happening in the town. Just obviously you're the only business in town that's got any customers, anything's happening. And there's cars parked outside your shop. Is there anywhere else, somewhere big? We need somewhere big because we want to organise a play fair. They had this concept of a play fair, and I said, what's a play fair? And they said, the people you've got, the hippies, have all got skills, they've all got crafts, they know how to make things and do things, and these schools, modern education isn't teaching anybody. No one knows how to knit or sew or paint or draw or make a pair of sandals and play music. None of that's happening. They're just teaching reading and writing and arithmetic kind of thing in the schools. So we need to do that. And I said, well, there is an old school here. They just built a new one around the corner. This is the old school down there. Have you had a look at that? No. And I said, come down and I'll show you. And we went down there, and of course there were smashed windows and broken glass, and we managed to find a door that was hanging off its hinges and went in, and there was bloody wheelie motorcycle tracks all around the floors where kids had been hooning around. But it was a bloody nice building, you could see it, it had been built back around the turn of the century, and back when there was plenty of wood and big slabs of it, and had a lovely floor, even if it did have black marks all over it from tyre tracks.
Solid as oak and really suitable, with a huge auditorium, offices.
It was up for demolition.
I went and asked the council, could we use it? And they said, some bloke called Brian Keys is going to demolish it. He's given us $350 and we sold it to him. It was out for tender and he was the successful tenderer. I was there at the council meeting and I said, why don't you let the public have it? And they said, oh, we can't because it's already tendered out.
Tendered
got
out.
Yeah, well, I knew that. I was there.
And I'd put in 6 tenders. And they accepted it. And he turned round and decided he wasn't going to demolish it after all.
It became officially known as the Community Centre, affectionately known as the Com Centre, and scathingly the Hippie Embassy. Strategically located on a corner block opposite the Post Office and RSL Club, the Com Centre stuck out like a sore thumb. For 5 years, it was the most discussed building in Bellingen.
It was a pretty nice little effort, actually. It was
A pretty what effort?
a nice little effort to take over some buildings that council didn't want anymore and try and make it a centre out of them, and it was terrific.
Oh, I walked in there and fell in love with it.
Because?
Of all this wonderful crowd of creative people.
No, the first thing we did there was start the kitchen up.
Daily meals, that sort of thing, a craft centre, a welcoming place for people who obviously didn't fit into the CWA model.
It was providing an information centre for visitors, it was providing a canteen, it was providing training for young unemployed people.
It was really, for me, a refreshing thing about Bellingen is that I could be heard.
When we went into Bellingen, you'd walk up the street and you'd see the hippies in the street, and it was sort of a mixture of amusement and concern.
Do you want to tell me about the concern, what you were concerned about?
Just that we didn't know what type of people they were, like whether because they were so different in their ideas, and worried about the drug side of things. There was a lot more drugs coming into the area because of that.
Bellingen was at that time a town in transition. There was a fair few empty shops. A lot of the farmers were leaving, selling off small parts of their land to newcomers. It was a transitional time, and there was both acceptance and non-acceptance in pretty equal parts there for a while.
So I mean, most of the townspeople, I mean, they were really anti-hippie. I mean, these bunch of bloody scumbag, dull bludgers moving up, and I mean, they deeply resented that. No question.
And they were all young people with long hair and beautiful looks, barefoot, but they were like breastfeeding in public, which was something no local would have done. And they just walked around as if they owned the place. That's how the locals felt. They felt they had been run over.
Well, it was quite alien to all of us, and the way some of them weren't really clean.
Right.
And little kids running around weeing in the gutter was very different for oldies, the old townspeople.
And,
I can imagine that.
And people thought that they were actually mad coming up here and buying what they bought at Klang, but it was ideal. They knew what they were doing, and they bought it cheaply and sold it dearly.
The pub was easing up a bit there. In those days we could comfortably sit on the veranda of the pub. It wasn't so comfortable if we went inside. You sort of felt you were being watched and sized up, and that somebody might want to have a go at you. Particularly the timber workers who came in every afternoon with sawdust sprayed all over them, and in their singlets and shorts, stubbies. And we were lazing around with a half-dressed women. Bits of body showing all over the place. It was a real contrast to them and us, the hippies and the rednecks.
At the time, many of the townsfolk were probably relatively accepting, but there were a few people who weren't definitely impressed and had their own agendas.
The Com Centre tolerated anybody who walked in the door, and there were absolutely no rules. People went there for information. They wanted to know how to grow food, how to mend the leaking water tank, how to get on the dole, how to get off the dole, and to get transport. Even its greatest detractors would remember it as a hive of activity. It was dynamic and vital. People went there to fix their cars, nurse their babies, have a cup of tea and get information. Brian Keyes, a former art director, guided its transformation from a derelict school into what many considered the most attractive building in Bellingen.
Another thing you did there that was really, really good was putting the sprinklers up in those big camphor laurels between the comm centre and the RSL.
Yeah.
And people would come out of the RSL and they'd be wiping their faces and saying, "Geez, I didn't think it was going to rain tonight."
When we got the community centre, we got the old schools, the community centre, we needed money to fix it up. We needed to paint it, we needed some furniture, we needed some equipment, we needed some kitchen equipment, we needed, all lights, all sorts of things. And even as cheap as we could do it, it was still going to cost money. So we decided to make money by the fabulous variety show.
Well, that was a variety show.
A variety show, wasn't it? Yeah.
And
I think
we played about 3 times, and every time with the pack them out and the people hanging in those big windows, you know, those school rooms.
Yeah, wonderful
people hanging
windows.
there just to see it.
It was so packed. Every foot was taken up.
I was involved with one of the shows that Kesey put on there, which was a really good show. I think it ran 3 nights, fully booked out every night.
The other thing I remember about then that was really, really good was building that, I don't know, a gantry, I guess, for the lights, because I remember sitting up there with you, watching shows and moving the lights around a bit, having a few smokes, looking down at everybody.
And Kesey put on a really good show. He put up a lighting and rig up on the roof, and it was very professional.
Here we were putting on this amazing show which was more professional than Avatar.
It's pretty hard to hate people that you're sitting next to enjoying a performance of something.
It was such a good way to start it off. It was just great.
People would put things on there and you'd see lots and lots of other residents coming there, and that's a breakdown.
It was one of the first occasions where hippies entertained the Straits, and everybody was pretty well impressed. It worked out really well.
The Comm Centre inspired and hosted plays, reviews, music evenings, dances, film evenings, lectures, workshops, discussions, and an amazing rainforest display. The town library moved in and prospered. The Health Commission opened an office, and so did the North Coast Environment Centre. It inspired early local newsletters like The Rave and Catchment, and eventually the national magazine Maggie's Farm was formed in Bellingen.
Wonderful things happened back then.
In 1978, Tricia and I arrived in Bellingen, and I had an eye out for a radio station that I could work in, because I'd worked in radio in the United States and in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. So that's what I knew how to do.
Stephen Abel was coming around asking for money up front for the radio station we were going to have. But I thought, how are we going to get a radio station? But I made a promise of so much a week for a month or something like that to put towards it. And sure enough, we got one of the first community radio stations around. I'd never even heard of community radio before that.
I put a tie on, as simple as that. I put a tie on, even when it was hot. And I combed my hair, and I tried to look kind of as normal as possible. And I talked about community development and how good it would be for the community. We had to train people. We had to build the world's first mud brick radio station, still standing to this day despite Bellingen rains and floods. Run completely by volunteers, over 100 hours a week.
Tourists and visitors were attracted to the Comm Centre by its beautiful rainforest gardens, and were often rather bemused to find themselves lining up 3 deep with the unemployed for the $1 lunch. When the federal government's Community Youth Support Scheme announced in spring 1977 that it was awarding the Comm Centre $16,000 to help the unemployed, there was jubilation. But the centre's detractors wanted to know How come the hippies were getting paid? Traditionally, the Shire Council secured any grant money for Bellingen.
It was, in my view, a real community centre, but it also was a bone of contention between the people on council who wanted the land for their council building and a lot of the residents of the town who just thought as the, you know, the local mosque.
The mosque.
Like a mosque. Try building a mosque there, mate. It, you know, would have got an even worse reception than the community centre.
It was a deliberate ploy to improve the lot of these people. And anything went as long as they were beneficiaries. And that's why people got preference.
I remember you writing up a big sign. We rented one of the shops up near Raymond's there, and you wrote on there, you know, Labor headquarters or something. We had a Labor office. That Bellingen had voted 99% Nationals or Country Party for the last 100 years. Yeah,
They still do. On the pub veranda, I said, anyone want to buy a copy of the Bello and find out what's happening at the comm centre? At which point I heard people saying the comm centre, the communist centre, we'd never go there if you paid us. We want to get rid of those people. They're troublemakers. They're the worst thing that's ever happened to this town.
What do you reckon was the most successful thing that ever happened there? Certainly the market was the biggest stirrer. I mean, I don't think there was ever anything top that. Just for a shitstorm.
They nearly got into trouble for that, didn't they?
Oh, it did. That's more or less what caused the public meeting, I reckon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The first Bellingen market was held at the comm centre that same spring. Over 1,000 people attended.
Well, I remember the very first market and how horrified the town were, how many people were here. I think it took them aback.
The main street, which was normally deserted on a Sunday, was lined with cars. It was all too much for some Chamber of Commerce members.
And somebody had some dope cookies there. I don't know who that would have been. And they were going out to selected customers with the lemongrass tea.
What I remember is that in the afternoon, a couple of people got some drums out and just started drumming. And this great drum jam just started sort of building up until it got literally half the people at the market were drumming. You know, that's my memory. And it went for about half an hour or something. You know,
I think my favourite thing there was the Lions Club caravan where they were doing hamburgers and pies and stuff next door to the
pigs.
Well, yeah, but next door I was thinking of the girls from Darkwood who had the massage tent. That was absolutely classic. All these girls wearing about as little as you could possibly wear and doing this massage tent, and the Lions guys just there with their tongues hanging out.
They had a massage tent where people were giving massages and the locals thought it was a brothel.
The local business people complained. Basically, their concept of the market fair was that it's totally done them out of business.
And they were worried about the market was going to take all the money away from the town. And now that's probably brings more money than anything else into the town.
And that was the kind of market it was. It wasn't for selling. We were just there for fun, to see each other and for the townspeople to see us. And they saw us and didn't like us one bit.
The hippies should go back to where they came from, basically. And they were unemployed and on the dole, or whatever they called it in those days. Dole bludgers.
I think a lot of them, hippies were on the dole, and that was wasn't done back in those days. You didn't just go on the dole to enjoy life. It was a last resort.
1976 to 1996 or something. 20 years, yeah.
Yep.
20 years. And I think I was on the dole the whole time.
The Chamber of Commerce demanded action from Council and got it. The Community Management Committee was fired. That action was endorsed later at a rowdy public meeting of 800 people.
Well,
get rid of the hippies meeting, that's what it was really.
Did you see that when they had the community centre that became a significant focus for it all? Like the market that they had and stuff like that?
That was the part of it. You know, it had come to a peak by that stage and everybody had...
But that's what more or less led to the infamous, famous public meeting that you chaired.
Yes.
Were you shy president then?
No.
No. So how did you come to chair that?
Yeah, it might be two takes, mate.
All right, I'll be...
Thanks. Because I was a concerned citizen and there were so many of these people around. I knew there'd be a big meeting, but I didn't know it was going to be as big as it was.
I remember going to the meeting and you had a little table set up in front of
I thought there might have been 500 people there, but more like 1,000 plus.
Right.
And a lot of people weren't there. But that was the indicator to the well-to-dos in the community that things had to change. And they did start to change fairly quickly.
In what way? What was...
Well, people shouldn't go pushing others around.
Right. So who was pushing who? I'm a bit vague.
The alternates were pushing all the old-timers out. All out of all the rural communities, all out of the public halls.
And so every logger who lived in or near Bellingen was required to go there. But in order to get them to go to the meeting in the Memorial Centre, they were allowed free drinks at the Diggers Club next door. So they were all pretty pissed by the time they came to the Memorial Hall. They got there just before all the hippies arrived. And their voices were loud, of course, and said all the right things that good loggers are supposed to say.
The whole situation seemed to be escalating, and they had the sort of now famous, I think, public meeting in Bellingen where they decided that they shouldn't have any of these hippies in town at all. The community centre should be burnt to the ground.
And you're lazy! Settle down. Try and have a word up here. Burying their babies in the bush. Littlies outside hamming them Wheatley in the nutty. Massage! I mean massage in town, mate!
Losing my job, what do you guys think you're doing? You're ruining our country, you're ruining our land, blah, blah, blah.
Demands of "get the hippies" made one spectator compare the event to a Nazi Germany rally.
Hippies were accused of virtually everything from burying their babies in the bush to sort of, you name it. It was a fairly hostile meeting, and it was probably the biggest crowd that had been seen in Bellingen in that time frame.
The scariest of them all were the women. They were really fierce, and I remember up on the stage there was Peter Sanger, John McLaughlin, and that publican from Dorrigo.
Remember a waltz between, was it Dr. McLaughlin? That's right, and Brian Keys, the microphone waltz.
Like barnacles on the bottom of the boat, they are. They had their babies in the bush and they do this and do this.
He might have been a crappy doctor, but he was a very good copywriter.
We're talking about Dr. John McLaughlin.
We are indeed. I hope he's dead.
You hope he's dead?
Oh dear me.
But it was, once again, the front line of the battle, really. There was no way that any of the newbies were going to leave.
It felt really dangerous being there. It's quite amazing that no actual physical violence broke out.
They were just appalling. So finally we just said, well, we're going. We just left the hall, left the drunks down the front.
Dear me, that was a horrible night.
It's horrible, wasn't it? Really horrible.
The exchange was angry, the noise was horrific, and then it all seemed to peter out and everyone went home and there was no resolution as far as I can remember.
Yeah, Bellingen. A great place. Yeah. Happy place for lovely people all dancing around the maypole and chucking flowers at each other. It was the most vicious, brutal, nasty little scene while a small mafia of people ran it.
Because of that meeting, I don't know whether it was before or after, we denied business The Commonwealth Bank had to close for 2 days because the hippies came and drew out all their accounts.
I remember going to the Commonwealth Bank and just closing my account with them because they'd supported kicking us out of the comm centre.
Well, I can't understand who was really against the hippies.
There was, with some people, there was a problem, but we had no problem with it. We had no problem whatsoever.
Hardware shop, for example, they were all really friendly. They were sort of glad to have our custom.
You know, but guys like Carl Foster, he just went, well, ka-ching, my cash register's ringing, so it's not that bad a thing, All these, they're all bringing their broken down bombs in for me to fix, and he could see that it wasn't a bad thing.
We were bloody arrogant.
Yeah, a little bit.
We were fucking arrogant.
No, we were cheeky, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
When the council gave the old school to the hippies, there was a definite time limit. It was always the council's plan to knock it down and build a new council chambers. I guess no one ever expected the community centre was going to be such a raging success. I mean, the council thought half a dozen hippies, what are they going to do? They can maybe have it and whatever. And of course, next thing, the hippies are getting grants from the Whitland government, and they're doing this and doing that. Government departments are moving in, and it's the most interesting building, the most discussed, the best building in town.
Council needed an edifice and a place to work, blah, blah, blah. I actually liked the old council chambers. And I thought that accommodated more than enough people to look after a shire of this size.
They had the public meeting and got permission to pull it down, and they still fought about it for years, but ultimately it did come down.
It took council another 3 years before it could legally demolish the comm centre. During that time, councillors learned not to write the new settlers off as a bunch of no-hopers.
A lot of us were professional, semi-professional, well-heeled tradies from middle-class homes.
They thought we were rabble because of how we dressed. They thought we were tramps, but then it turned out that we were actually not only educated but well connected.
Many new settlers had university degrees and successful careers behind them. They had considerable political knowledge and knew how to get help from state and federal government departments.
We had a lot of political clout. We could get a ministerial ear if we really needed to.
We really thought that any other town in its right mind would be grateful for what was happening with it.
Eventually, though, every appeal and legal challenge to demolish the comm centre was exhausted. Finally, it became apparent that while the comm centre stood, it would always be a bone of contention in the community.
The council workers started taking it to pieces and taking the tin off the roof, and we were just taking the tin off the truck and nailing it back on the roof.
I was there taking bits of wood and nailing it back up as they were pulling it down. At that stage it looked like we were fighting a losing battle, and sure enough that's what happened.
And then the second time they came basically in very early hours of the morning, and by the time we'd rallied people to protest, they'd half demolished it. It was very sad.
Murph Brownlee had a chainsaw and he was chainsawing those vertical, those studs, he was chainsawing. He was chainsawing the building, and I stood with my legs either side of this vertical piece of timber that he was chainsawing, and he kept on chainsawing between my legs. That's a true story. He didn't stop and I didn't move.
There was no way that building was going to be allowed to stand in front of those beautiful new council chambers. No way. There was nothing more we could have done at that point in time. No.
And when it got pulled down, that was sad.
But it was very sad and very thoughtless.
It was just such a wonderful place, and then to see suddenly it being destroyed, it was horrible. Really, yeah.
Such a beautiful old building. It had housed generations of local people as a public school. It would seem such a waste of a wonderful space.
It's quite amazing. It's hard to stand here and think how bitterly fought over this couple of acres of land was, that it just meant so much to everyone at the time, and God only knows why the townspeople were so opposed to it, because it was absolutely quite extraordinary.
It's a real hole now that there's nothing like that in Bellingen, because it never got replaced.
Within days of the destruction of the comm centre, the Good Food Shop was destroyed by fire. For many, it looked as though Bellingen had lost its two front teeth.
My God, the two buildings that meant the most to me in the whole town, they were both gone.
And it took the heart out of the alternative movement. They didn't want us in town, okay, we wouldn't go.
After the first market, the hostile town meeting, the demolition of the comm centre, and the Good Food Shop being destroyed by fire, Bellingen lost much of its appeal to the alternative community. They decided to concentrate their energies in the valleys, build their own schools, hold their own markets. The next market was held in Kalang and was a raging success.
Yeah, come gather round a fire, gather round and sing. It's time to get together, all the time has come to bring back the call of the wild, the fall of Babylon. Let's stand tall with the trees, break down these walls and be free. Yeah, bring all the colors, bring all the sounds, bring all the beautiful things to be found. Bring them to the table, bring them to the feast. We shall bow down to the north and to the south and to the west and to the east. Gather round the elders, their stories to be told. Oh, gather round the fire with the wisdom of old. Bring all the children, bring them to the wise. See the future of our grandchildren in our children's eyes. Yeah, 'cause we're all here together, just living this life. Yeah, and there's nothing you can do about it, but maybe you can do it twice. Yeah, you might think you're above it all, you might think you're something else. I can tell you right now that there's more than two types of hell, but there's only one heaven, and it's right here, right now. To be righteous, time to be real. It's time to be made of timber, it's time to be made of steel. Oh, it's time to be made of lightning, yeah, it's time to get this wheel rolling. Yeah, 'cause we're all here together, just living this life. Yeah, there's nothing you can do about it, but maybe we could do it twice. You might think you're above it all, you might think you're something else. I can tell you right now there's more than two types of hell, but there's only one heaven, and it's right here, right now. Yeah, there's only one heaven, and it's right here, right now. You might think you're above it all, you might think you're something else. I can tell you right now there's more than two types of hell, but there's only one heaven, and it's right here, right now. Yeah, there's only one heaven, and it's right here, right now.
And the police came in and they thoroughly enjoyed it. We used to play things like having too much fun. We're breaking the law, we're having too much fun, you know. It was very, very good, and the feelings were good.
Well, in those days, we're pretty well rocked. You didn't want to miss out on anything. So some days you'd be doing things in your own valleys, and other days you'd all go, or some of you'd go to other valleys. But we pretty well always kept busy. It wasn't that we didn't have a lot of parties, but when we had them, they were fabulous. They were huge.
Bellingen has attracted because of the nature of the openness and the open-heartedness of the people that live in Bellingen. We could always get these teachers to come here because there is an audience for them in the sense of people wanting to hear the teachings, and then we would also have those teachers go to Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, but it would be typically the Australian capitals and Bellingen.
The alternatives were very environmentally aware.
We didn't have a political movement here. We just had a very strong feeling about what was being done in the name of the law, you know.
They fought to stop Coffs Harbour becoming a woodchip port. They fought to stop logging the black scrub in the Darkwood headwaters. They were strongly represented at the Terania Creek rainforest dispute and the sand mining battle at Middle Head.
Police arrived at Terania Creek.
We had a lot of environmental protests which were exhausting. You know, we'd go trundling off to the beaches and the forests.
No law whatsoever says I can't put my head out this window.
Zircon, an essential ingredient in the nuclear and war industry, is found on Australian beaches in minuscule amounts. It is so valuable that multinational companies are prepared to destroy coastal forests and scour every grain of sand in their search.
One of these rare forests that goes right down to the beach, and it was just beautiful.
Two people arrested in a demonstration against sand mining at Middle Head on the north coast.
And they knocked it all over and put a dredge through and dredged everything and tossed it out to sea. It was just awful.
The 40 arrests of the first day's confrontation were just the beginning.
I was finally arrested. I think the official reason was I was obstructing the dredge.
In one dramatic week, there were over 100 arrests.
We all got off, of course, but it all politicised us.
And the fights go on.
The forest wars have never gone away. We've been fighting them again here in Bellingen Shire for the last 5 years. They have just finished smashing Tarkeith, and they've gone down to Nambucca State Forest, where they're doing exactly the same. This is the whole north coast that they're after, and they want it, and they're coming for the last big cut.
One other thing that really in many ways defined this town too, and that was things like the Bishop's Creek Cup. You know, Jill Rochton was a Melbourne heiress who bought that big property out there and put old Tom in there. And I count those, you know, if you look back on a long time in Bellingen, events like that.
Jumped out well with Grey Affair. High Puno got out smartly. Just behind them, Happy Union getting up into a handy position, and they were being followed by...
I think the truth of it is that what did break down the real recidivists that didn't want to kind of get on board the fact that human beings come in all shapes, sizes and colours, we're all okay if you give them a chance, was those sorts of events. That there were a lot of locals at the Bishop's Creek Cup, and they realised it was a lovely, benign, nice, gentle thing to do.
The Bishop's Creek Cup, Tom Davies and Mark Giles with his parties that he used to put on down here, I mean, they were characters, weren't they? And
events like the launching of the dogs on the those things were wonderful.
Did you go to Giles's parties? Oh, I did, yeah. I went down there the night that they sent the rocket to the moon, and yeah. It was an interesting, quite an enjoyable period, really. I mean, they were, in the main, a very credible lot of people.
Well, I'm a seek redemption, play the fool, but I don't think that I will be playing by your rules anytime soon. Anytime soon. So I lay down my weapons, lay down my tools, so I can risk it all if I have nothing to lose. And yes, I lay down and I listen to the west wind blow.
I have pretty fond memories of that particular sort of 10 to 15 years anyway, and sort of still have some pretty good friends from that period. So.
ashes and dust. So what we need is a shift in consciousness. I trust cause I know I must own in all of humanity. Universal concept.
Wow, I'm back in Bellingen. It's such a joy to come to Bellingen nowadays. It's so different. Like I'm standing outside Thor's Gourmet Meats, and that would have once been the good food shop. I've stood in this doorway of the shop, looking up this lane by the hour and the pub. And on a Saturday there was a few drunks. I'd call them drunks because they'd been kicked out of the club, out of the RSL, because they were drunks. They used to stand across here and I'd have the shop open, and they would come over after they'd had half a dozen schooners or so and ask me what it was like being a hippie. Did the hippies just all leave, or?
Well, no. See, all of the hippies have got to be old people, right? And
Right.
they're no chickens anymore, and they don't like living up the bush too much. It's too cold in winter time, and too far, and they've moved on in a lot of instances. And
where have they gone?
Probably back to where they came from.
It still exists today to a certain degree in there, you know. I mean, there's still a number of people in Bellingen, they just, Darkwood up there amongst the bloody hippies, you know. And of course, there's no hippies left up here.
The hippies are staying home by the fire, thinking about other things.
Well, I think a lot of the established hippies kind of became a bit more normal for a start.
Started wearing clothes.
Yeah, started, but also running businesses and, taking on the responsibilities of life, bringing up families, having to get jobs.
That sounds like a cliche, back to where you came from. What, do you think they came from Asia or somewhere?
Oh, they probably came from yuppie Sydney.
Right.
Yeah, and
it's hard to believe how much Bellingen has changed. There's a whole lot of little towns like Bellingen off the highway up and down the north coast, but Bellingen has become quite sort of unique in that I think it's the hippie influence, that all the arty-farty people who were here, who came into the town and weren't so worried about chainsaws and cows' bums and got into the whole leisure lifestyle, and a lot of wealthy people have followed them here. And Bellingen has now become, some people even say it's a little bit yuppie, but I'm not sure that's true, but the DNA that the hippies put on the place has really shined. Just a bit flash walking across the street on a pedestrian crossing, but there you go. You could go into a real estate agent here and pay $1 million, $2 million, whatever. It's not cheap.
Most of the old hippies that are still around are no longer hippies, they're yuppies.
Like Bellingen would have died if it hadn't been for the hippies to come in big numbers and bringing the young kids and shopping in town. The hippies didn't go to Coffs Harbour to shop, they did everything in Bellingen.
We started with a social experiment that none of us realised how big and how deep and what it really meant, because as hippies we came here buying cheap land and the opportunity to build a house ourselves with our own hands out of the materials on the land, and have a free-form life without the pressures and strains of suburbia and the cities.
Let's see if I can cross this street. It used to be such a street that except for Friday and Saturday morning it would be deserted. You could stand here and not see a single car. Now you've got to take your life in your hands to get across the street.
Eventually they realised, as they got to know us, that we weren't drug crazed nutters from, planet X.
The best thing I ever did when I came to this town was I started playing cricket for 15 years. I played for cricket for Bellingen.
It's always been the key, hasn't it, to life in a country town, get involved.
Colin and I both taught in the local schools, and so we got to meet a lot of local people, and they realised that we were just like them, basically.
Both sides needed to understand that stereotyping any group of people is a mistake, and you really have to take people on an individual basis. So I think that's how the community grew over time.
How do you find it now, living in Bellingen? Oh, I love it. It's still, it still just has that dynamic.
Well, Bellingen itself is a very happening town.
It's a groovy town to be in. It's got a great feeling of, what's the word I'm looking for, community.
I miss the old Bellingen. I really do.
What is it you miss?
Well, Bellingen in those days, I mean, it was a little agricultural town. Today it's, the city has moved in and pretty much consuming it with all their money and so forth.
You know, when I first came back in '88, there was a wave of new people came to town. They bought up a lot of real estate, so there was a lot of work for all the builders and tradespeople. But also they integrated into the community.
That's special about Bellingen, the nature of the people that have come here. And it's still true, and that's why whenever everyone asks me, do you miss the good old days in Bellingen? No, because the good old days are still here. It was then, it still is.
Everybody who comes to Bellingen gets involved in something that adds to that community. And that in turn has driven land prices up, so it costs more to live here than it does in Coffs Harbour.
But I think with the hippie movement, they brought in a lot of small cottage industries into the town in later years.
The market that was such a dispute is now the biggest market on the north coast. It's quite wonderful.
It's been a great market, and I had a good day, so I'm happy. Excellent.
Is it more interesting now than it was when you were a kid?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, yeah. I actually love the way Bellingen's developed over the years. It's so diverse now. Everyone gets on well with everyone. Doesn't matter what background you come from.
There's lots of good things that have happened with the new Bellingen. Everybody's got a lot more money, and that helps. There's a much brighter sort of vibe about it.
Realize I've been here before. Those shadows of death, they sit in my door. And this nightmare that takes my gaze promises there is a better way.
A seed that was sown, a kind of that was about community, and that seed has kind of grown and flourished in Bellingen. There's no doubt about it. People pick up that energy, gets transferred from one generation or one wave of people to the next. It really does.
It's a place where people are on the forefront of what's going on in this world, today's world, and people have come here to find a resonance with their own humanity. That's what keeps Bellingen alive.
Yida, Jolumbo. Yida, always. Jolumbo, long ago. Always long ago. Yida, Yilana. Yida, always. Yilana, from here. Gumbangir, Gundi. Belonging to Gumbangir, Wajar, homeland. Always was, always will be Gumbangir, homeland. Bari, Gure Woban.
Yari gangaya gappa gujulum kububango Urunda nungugundi Ya uban gugure uban bari Yam gumbengir gundi wajar
Now what we need is a sustainable future, which we work together, in which we nurture our earth, our mother, for we have no other, which we can learn from each other and love one another. Time has come, revolution, it has begun, so let's rise together, rise and breathe, rise and breathe as one.
You got to talk to all these people and relive their experiences and your own experiences, and look, you're getting older. I think a lot about the past. Not that I'm wallowing it and wishing for the good old days, not like that, but just treasuring all the things that happened here. It's really like that.